So now let's style the table that we have been working on. And as always, let's start by giving our component a fixed width and also center it in the viewport. So here I'm going to select the table simply using the element selector of the table. So a width again of 800 pixels. And just so we can see this, let's actually also give it some background color. Just for a short amount of time. All right. So you see that now the table got wider, and then these three columns here basically grew in order to fill that empty space. And we can also see that by default, now this text here is centered. So that's because this is a TH element, so a table head cell, because the same we can see here in these four. So these one are now also centered, right? But this column here did not expand like these three did, and that's simply because all of these cells here are table head cells. All right, so now let's center this inside of the viewport, but let's actually use another way. So we have been doing always this trick. So margin something and then auto. And of course, that is going to work here as well. However, I want to start showing you that there are always multiple ways of doing things in CSS. So, can you think of another way of centering our entire page here inside of the viewport? And remember that this viewport that we see here is basically the body. So how could we do this? Well, one way of doing it is to say that the body should be a flex container. So display flex, and there is nothing wrong with that. So the body is just like any other element. So we can also make it a flex container just like any of the other elements. And so now, in order to then center all the flex items, which in this case is just one, remember that we use justify content set to center. And there we go. Now let's just give this here some margin to the top still. All right. Now let's remove this color here. And now I actually want to give this table for now some borders. So we can say border 1 pixel and then solid as always. And let's just use some gray. Well, we can go with this one actually. And so this will add basically a border all around the table. And now let's say we wanted to add borders inside of the whole table. So between all the cells, like in a more traditional table. So between all the rows and all the columns. So to do that, we can simply select all of the table cells and then add a border around all of them. Now, our cells are these TD elements and also the TH elements, right? So we need to select both of them at the same time here if we want to style them in the same way. And for now, that's what we want to do. And so, as I was saying, let's add some border here of 1 pixel solid and or gray color. And there we go. And that looks a little bit strange, but if we think about it, this result actually makes sense. So each of the cells has a border around it, and so that's why here basically we have two borders very close to each other. Right? Now usually we don't want this to look in this way, and so there is this weird property which is called border collapse. And so basically what we will do here is that when we have two borders close to one another, like we have here, we can make them collapse. So collapse means that these will basically be put together into just one border. So just like this. So see the difference? Before we basically had two borders in the same position. So here, for example, coming from the top of this one and coming from the bottom of this one. And so if we say we want to collapse them, then they are transformed into just one. Now here, let's also add some padding. So 16 top and bottom, 24 left and right, let's say. So that is starting to look more like a real table. And actually we want all of the text here to be aligned to the left. So no centering. And so text align left. Nice. So that is starting to look a little bit like what we have here. Right. But now let's actually get rid of these borders, because in this case we don't want it, but I still wanted to show you how you could add borders in the correct way if you wanted to do that for your own tables at some point. Great. Now remember, what we want to do now is to format this first row here to have this green background color, and the text should also be white. Okay. So how are we going to do that? Well, we somehow need to select basically all of these cells that we have here and format them individually. So we usually never format like an entire row or the head. So instead, what we do is to format the cells themselves. Now these four here are TH elements, but we cannot just do this because there are also TH elements right here. So inside of the table body. But we just want the ones that are in the table head. And so we can simply do this, right? So a descendant selector selecting only the table head cells that are inside of the actual table head. And so here we can now give them that green background color. And also set the text to white. Okay, so that is starting to look better and better. Now we have this issue that we have kind of these invisible borders here, basically between these cells. And in order to fix that, we actually need to make them disappear by turning this one here back on. So we do, in fact, always need this border collapse here set to collapse. All right. And so now, since we didn't specify any borders, then these invisible borders that we had here before kind of disappeared. Now, if we take a look here at the demo, we see that actually the 4 columns have the exact same width. So let me show you how we can also do that. And so basically what we need to do is to format the width of these very first cells, so the ones that are in the head, and then the entire table will follow. So it will automatically adjust itself if we say that the width of each of these table head cells, so these 4 here, should be 25%. So 25% is of course 100% divided by 4. And there we go. All right. And with that, we are almost done. So if we compare it here, it looks almost the same. While the text is a little bit bigger, let's fix that as well. So here we can say that the font size should be 18 pixels. All right. But now what's missing is this very typical table formatting of adding these zebra stripes, which is what we call them. So basically that's having these alternating background colors, which makes the table really easy to read and to scan. Now I noticed that we're kind of missing one of the rows here. So we have the width, depth, and weight, but there's no height. So this second row here is missing somehow. So let's quickly add that. And I will just copy all of this here and paste it down here. And so here, this is height. And 100, 110, and 90. All right. And so this now actually looks exactly the same, except for the zebra stripes. So let's do those zebra stripes. And so let me show you how we can do that. So inside of the T-body, we now basically want to select the odd rows and the even ones. So with odd, I mean the row number 1, 3, 5, and so on and so forth. And with odd, we want the second one, the fourth, 6, 8, and so on. And so let's select the TRs inside of the T-body. So the table rows. And then remember that we have this very handy nth child pseudo class. So nth child, which remember basically allowed us to select any of the child elements by their order number. So for example, we could do this, select just the third one and set the background color to red there. And so now the entire third row here would become red. Now I said previously here that we actually usually select these cells individually, but back here that was basically because I also needed to individually style actually these cells with this width. But we could in fact also have done this. So T hat and then the TR, and here of course there's only one. And so the result would look exactly the same, right? But this styling here of the width of the individual cells will of course need to stay in this selector right here. So in this rule. All right. So again, many times we do format only individual cells, but in this case, where we want to select the row based on the order, we actually need to style rows. All right. And so I think I explained this before, that here we can use a keyword of odd and even. And so the odd ones are now red. So again, that's 1, 3, 5, and so on. And then let's do the same with even. And so here, some other color. And of course, that looks very bad. And so let's get some actual colors again here from open color. And so let's actually use this very, very light gray here for the odd ones. And then some darker tone, maybe this one here, for the even cells. Or the even rows, actually. And yeah, there we go. That's it. Let's compare it. And it is exactly the same one. Great. And so this is the basics of creating and of styling tables with HTML and CSS.